Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the things that have changed. I was going to do it just since the fall, but there hasn't been that much change since December. So I tried to focus on this mostly on the things that's changed since, let's say, the spring semester of last year. Um, but quite a few things have changed during the course of the fall semester too. So we'll talk a little bit about those. And we're just going to do a kind of scattershot overview of this. But if there's anything you'd like to see demonstrated, there's a lot of links and things in here. And I'll share the slides with you in just a minute so you can try them on your own. And we can also stop and take a look at any of these things as we go through. So let's talk a little bit about the changes and the major things. Well, first, to share the slides. Um, and these are the major themes on the left that we're going to be talking about with a little bit more added to that. There we go. So you can either scan that QR code, or actually, let me just drop it in the chat. Um, and If you click on the link, it'll ask you to add this to your Google Drive. Just say yes. And then again, you can keep what you want and take notes on it if you'd like, or do whatever you'd like with it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the new features that we have on campus, the AI things that we have through campus licensing. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the changes in ChatGPT that have made it a bit more powerful and more useful for curriculum support and for supporting your classes. We're going to talk about AI agents, which are really powerful tools that actually will go out and do things for you on their own. We'll talk about some new AI browsers. We'll talk a little bit about multimodal AI and some of the capabilities that those add. And we'll also talk about some of the new modes, the deep thinking modes that have been added to some of the major AI platforms out there. Okay, so um, and also, I meant to put this in there, there's been so much talk about the environmental impact, but we actually have some measures of that now that there have been some studies, the effect of one more query in Gemini specifically, but similar results have been found for other platforms. But at least this was a more significant study that's been published and so forth. So in any case, um, campus tools. We now all have access to Gemini, Notebook LM, and Lumi. We've had separate workshops on each of those. The Lumi workshop was last year, and I think there's a link to that coming up if you missed that, link to the recording of that. We also had some sessions on Gemini and Notebook LM, and those at least scratch the surface of some of the things that can be done with these tools. One of the new features in Gemini, which just debuted this fall, is that Gemini has now the ability to create chatbots that was not there earlier, or it was only available in much more expensive versions. So we all now have the ability to create chatbots in Gemini. They're also available on other platforms. There's going to be a workshop on creating chatbots later today. In Gemini, they're called GEMs. The most common chatbots out there are probably still those created in ChatGPT, and those are called GPTs. And we can create these, and I'd recommend trying to do it within Gemini, because one of the nice things about having our campus license to Gemini is that these gems now can be used by all students equally. With the chatbots created in ChatGPT, the amount of access you had depends on whether you were using a free or a paid membership, which meant that students who were paying $20 a month for ChatGPT could use chatbots that we create much more extensively. They can work with them longer, ask more questions, and get more support. Students who were not able to afford that account ended up with a more limited number of queries, typically 3 to 5 queries a day. So by using Gemini to create chatbots, we now have the capability of doing that equally so that all students would have the same access to any chatbots that we create. One other thing, and this probably won't affect many people, but we had a lot of people across campus as part of our AI initiatives, and some of it was through an IITG grant-funded initiative last year, who bought a year-long license or at least several-month license to ChatGPT. Now that we have the Gemini license, we're not able to have the campus pay for ChatGPT licenses for ChatGPT, and I assume for other platforms. An announcement of that went out last fall because of the Gemini purchase. Okay, so to get to Gemini, you can just click on this link. It's just gemini.google.com. Or if you're in any of the Google apps and you click on that little menu in the top thing that lists all the apps, the top right corner, you can just scroll down until you see Gemini. It's that little sparkle type icon. And again, if you haven't played with it, try doing it. It's a very nice chatbot. It's a very nice AI platform. And one nice thing about having our campus instance is that any interactions that we have with it are not used to train the model. That's not true on many other platforms. Or on other platforms, you have to indicate whether you're allowing it to use the information you enter for training purposes or not. Some never allow you to opt out. Some will either opt you in or opt out by default, and their practices have often changed. So check the settings if you're using something other than Gemini, because most people who work with AI often will work with multiple platforms. But in general, it's safer to use Gemini for things because of this. If we looked at this, say, last summer, Gemini was probably about a year behind OpenAI and ChatGPT in terms of its capabilities, but the release that came out last fall had pushed it a little bit ahead, actually, of ChatGPT in terms of its accuracy, um, in terms of its processing power and so forth. But with the 3.0 release, it leapfrogged ahead. And it's now, well, as of early fall, it was actually more accurate than ChatGPT version 5. But then since then, OpenAI has come out with ChatGPT 5.1 and 5.2, which is the current release. And those are a bit more accurate in general, but Gemini is remarkably close. But one of the things that Google can do better than most of the other general platforms is image generation through first Imagen 4, and now Gemini owns Nano Banana, which does some really nice image creation. So again, playing with, I didn't put I meant to update to include Nano Banana in there, but the image creation through Gemini is dramatically better than it was before. And I think it does better than, say, ChatGPT or most other non-specialized image generation programs. And one of the most important features of Gemini is that it has a larger context window and than most other platforms. That in the flash mode version of this, when you get those instant responses, it can work with up to 1 million tokens, or if it's using a thinking mode, which is a little bit slower, it can access up to 2 million tokens. And basically what the tokens is what it's using to process your requests. And what this means in practice is you can upload much larger spreadsheets to it, you could upload much more text to it, and it's going to be able to process and handle that more effectively or more efficiently. It's able to use more information in generating its responses than the pro version, well, than the basic paid versions of most other AI platforms. So it's a really impressive platform. And again, it does provide equitable access because all students have equal access to these tools. And so people are not cut off whether they pay or not, as with other platforms. Notebook LM. How many people have worked with Notebook LM? You can indicate it in the chat or just open your mics.
Very little.
Anyone else? Okay, so Kevin has, Daniela hasn't yet. Michelle hasn't. Okay. I'd encourage you to play with it. It's really easy to use, and many of our students are using it. They discovered that a year or so ago before we had a license for it, because even the free version is very, very powerful. Um, and what it allows you to do basically is upload sources, which could be website URLs, it could be Google Slides, Google Docs, PDF files, audio files, or public YouTube sources. They have to be public to be able to access them, but also they have to be, I should have also mentioned, they have to have transcripts because the transcript is used to actually process much of the information. Although it can, well, it can handle some videos without that, but it's more efficient if you use ones that have a transcript. And with Title II, we should be encouraging the use of transcripts anyway. But I'm not sure which version our campus has. The free version of it will let you upload 50 different sources. The paid version, which I think we have, but you can put into up to 300 different sources. So if you're working on a project and you want to gather a lot of information really quickly, you you just assign them to the sources for this, and it will then generate summaries of it. It will can generate a podcast with two people speaking to each other. It can generate a short video. It can generate a briefing document summarizing the information. And all of this is now queryable. So once it creates these things, you can ask questions of it. And you can also have it generate infographics. It can generate, well, I think that's on the slide here. It can generate quizzes and self-tests. And um, I thought I'd change this. The cross notebook queries doesn't directly work yet. It's on the list of most requested features, but I do have this later, and I forgot to remove it from here. It's not available directly in Notebook LM, but if you link multiple notebooks into Gemini, you can use Gemini to query any of the notebooks to see what sort of overlaps there are between the notebooks. So in general, it's great for summarizing information. A lot of people are using it when they're working on major research projects, because if you upload dozens of papers, or if we do have the paid version, hundreds of papers, it's going to summarize all of them and allow you to query them and try to get it and try to find out more about them without necessarily having to sort through all that yourself. Presumably, if you're going to generate a paper with it, you may want to go back and look at all the sources, but it's a good way of getting a summary of the literature in a given field. And as Kevin noted, that unlike other AI platforms, it's only going to be using the sources that you put in. So it tends to be remarkably accurate. It can make some mistakes in interpretation, but they're relatively few. In general, it's using the same Gemini capabilities, but only based on what material it's been trained on, the material you upload. And another nice feature on it is that once you upload documents, you can also have it search for other related documents to add to that list. So it's also useful in expanding your literature base. And it will give you a list of I believe it gives you a list of up to 50 other sources, and you can just check which ones you want to add, and that they can be added into the database. So into the information base used by the notebook. Couple of the most common uses for this for instructional purposes. It's a really nice way of creating multiple means of representing information, that you can take a document which is text-based or videos and convert it into any of the other modalities. So you now are able to create multimodal representation for students, which again increases learning. So letting students perhaps listen to an audio summary or podcast summary where you have a male and female voice interacting together, very realistic voices interacting together and chatting with each other about the document or the documents that you've given it, in a more informal setting. And that's really nice. you can also create an infographic summarizing it. One researcher put his entire body of published research into it and asked it to generate a summary of that, both as a slideshow, as a podcast, and I forgot how else, but he was very impressed by how effectively it summarized his research, and it even emphasized some things that he had forgotten that he had done in his work once he got to see it all in that format. So it's a nice way of summarizing a lot of information in other formats, again, which makes it easier for students to form connections to. Um, and again, one of the ways that my students have often used it for the last year or so at least, is that I teach a capstone course where I ask students to read journal articles, working papers, and so on. And if they do presentations on those every week in class, each student is working with one or two other students, and they do a joint presentation of a research paper. And many of those papers require mathematical techniques that's a little bit more advanced than they may be comfortable with. And this allows them to get a basic intuitive understanding and then interrogate it and try to develop an understanding of the particular econometric or statistical methods that were used or the mathematical modeling that was used in a way that can make more sense to them. And, I do ask them to read the papers, and they are queried about the papers and so forth during the presentation, but it's a nice way of taking really complex subjects and breaking it down to make them more intuitive so that students can build up their understanding in a nice way, in a way that's appropriate for them, where again, they can interact with the documents in that case, with even just a single document to try to understand how it works. But yes, you do have to provide, someone has to provide the papers to Notebook LM. And basically, it's like a notebook. Well, it's sort of like, imagine it as a repository holding a set of related papers. Okay. In fact, we can hop over to that for just a moment, just to show how it might work. This is probably going to, well, okay, I am in my Oswego account. So here, this was one I created actually for workshop. Most of mine are in one of my personal accounts or one I have for the podcast, but let's just use this one because this is again the Oswego account. So what I did is, you can use deep read. I gave it a question. I asked it to find some sources related to I'm trying to remember exactly what I asked, to trends in income inequality and intergenerational income mobility over the past century or so. And it found all these sources. Now, I could have done that, or I could have uploaded my own papers here. So basically, because this was done really quickly, just as part of another workshop, I just checked all the boxes and selected them all. And then what it did is it created, among other things, an audio overview. Now, it will recreate this each time, but once you create it, you can always download it and save it. So, or unless, yeah. So let's create an audio overview just so you can get a quick view of this. The infographic is a relatively new feature. It's still in beta. You can generate a mind map on the sources, a video overview. You can generate a summary report. You can generate the slide deck or a data table if you have sources that have lots of data. Let's take a look here at the infographic. And then well, I'm sorry, for the reports. And here, again, you can craft ones where you tell it what to focus on. You could have it generate a briefing document just to summarize the key insights and quotes, a study guide, which is a really useful thing for students to do. You could generate a blog post to get a start on a post if you want to do that, policy analysis paper, an academic research report, concept explainer, or historical summary. So these are different ways of addressing, well, so you can pick one of these, and let's just say we're going to do, well, let's do an economic research report. And you'll get different suggested topics depending on what's in the information. And so it's doing both of those. And in general, For the audio, it generally takes about 3 to 5 minutes or so to generate it. The reports tend to be a little bit quicker. But it's a really quick way of distilling a lot of information to at least get a start on some literature. Um, and again, we can ask it questions. For example, how has the distribution of these are things it suggested. And let's go with, let's try that. It's now going to tell us how has the distribution of income changed in the 20th century, while it's also generating those other things. Um, and it's in a U-shaped arc where it became early in the 20th century, income inequality was high. During the Great Depression, things leveled off a bit. And then we had a fair amount of more equal income distribution up until the 1980s or so. Actually, it's saying late 1970s, we've seen a pretty dramatic shift in income inequality. And then it lists some reasons of these and some information on these. And if you click on these things, it will give you more details about the explanation as well about those bullet points. And it also tells you where the sources that it used were to address those issues. And then again, it gives you some possible questions, or you could type more. You can, ask your own questions of it. Any questions there? And if you want to share it, you can just go up to the share link once you've created a notebook. So if you create some resources to summarize information for your students, you can put the papers or the websites or the videos or other links in there. And then share this with your students, and then they can interact with it. Some faculty, I know when they're using OER textbooks, will upload their textbook chapters for each portion of their course. I've done this in some of my classes, and just share the podcast with students. Or you can share the notebooks. I generally didn't share the notebook because back then we didn't have the last time I did that was last spring. And at the time, we didn't have a campus license to this. And I feel much more comfortable doing that now. But again, if you share the notebook, students would have all these capabilities. If you share the individual items, you can always download them and share it with students directly. And it's still working on those things. Any questions on this? Or Kevin, how have you used it?
John, I'll ask a question. So
Sure.
basically, would it work that you could ask first, you could go into Notebook LM, ask Notebook LM to find some sources on a topic, upload those sources, and then ask Notebook LM to summarize them?
Exactly. Mhm.
Oh, thank you.
And if you're thinking about doing a research topic on something, if you've seen some interesting papers come out on the topic and you're interested in exploring it, you could always upload the papers that you found, find a few yourself, upload it here, ask it to go out and find some others, and then query it to see what the summary you have. And then, yes, ma'am, Michelle asked the information we upload is not used for training purposes. That's true. And in fact, that's true, I believe, still with the free version as well as with the paid version that we have on campus. So any information you upload to Notebook LM is not used for training. And here it has generated the economic research report here, well, a minute ago. Um, and here it is. And so it provided a nice summary of these things, or the rent-seeking finance sector, the financialization. Well, this is a focus on the economic analysis of financialization, but we could have asked it to generate a report, a research report on pretty much anything. And then we could rate it so that it will, again, determine whether it's doing well, et cetera. In general, yeah, in terms of copyright, um, if you upload something that's that copyrighted by someone else, that's a legal question that's questionable. If it's for your own use, I think a case could probably be made under fair use that it would be okay. If you're sharing it with students and it's copyrighted material, that that would probably go beyond fair use. On the other hand, you probably aren't going to be caught because unless there's some sort of unless your information and your use of it is somehow subject to a subpoena, for example. But I would not generally uploaded copyrighted information to it. Although, if you're uploading papers, papers from journals, that is questionable. I don't feel terribly troubled by doing that when we have personally, I don't feel very troubled by uploading papers for journals that the college has access to because students would be able to access those same papers directly. Although even there, it is a somewhat, at best, borderline issue. So, um, that's something you should take into account in making these decisions. So, that's Notebook LM, and by now we should have, if we go back, we should have the audio overview isn't quite there yet. You can you can also in the setting specify how long the audio overview is. By default, they're usually about maybe 14 to 20 minutes long, from what I've seen at least, um, and it's still going.
So one thing I've been using Notebook LM
Okay.
for,
Mhm.
you asked, but is for like rubric. So we created a rubric for like checking resumes, for example, in career services. And you can use it through Notebook LM. So it's only checking based on the principles that you put in the rubric, specifically for judging resumes in this case. So you can upload a resume, upload the rubric, and have it actually kind of grade based on the rubric. And it's not 100% perfect, I would say. So we're still um, making some tweaks and whatnot on that, but it has been very successful so far, I would say, for sure. But I do have a question
Sure.
as far as like generating the like audio or the video, um, because I have heard from students a lot that they're really concerned about how the energy that it takes to generate not just prompts, because we have talked about that, but specifically when it comes to generating video and audio. And what are your thoughts on that?
I have not yet seen any data on that, but yes, it's going to take more energy to generate these things than it would just to respond to a prompt. I don't know how much energy it's taking. Most of the energy in general, our computers are taking a huge amount, or network information is taking a huge amount of energy, which has been growing drastically every year. Most of that right now is going to streaming services or streaming information out there. Streaming video takes up a lot. Generating video, I'm sure, takes up a fair amount, much more than just streaming existing video. And as you can see, it's taking a few minutes to do this. So um, I don't know, and that's a good question.
Oh, thanks.
On the other hand, many of us are creating our own videos that we use in classes, and I'm not sure that that's any more efficient because we're still using computer resources to do that. And there's a tremendous amount of energy that goes into creating TikTok videos and YouTube videos and so forth. And all those videos had to be rendered. They weren't generated in the same way if they were recorded on smartphones or cameras, but a lot of the a lot of the computer use is actually in generating that or rendering that into a video format, and that's going to be true, I think, with I'm not sure how much more it takes to use AI to generate a video than it does to render a video that's been captured by other devices. And I just don't know on that. And that would be a good question. In fact, that might be a good question to ask. I was hoping we'd have this audio overview. Um, but you know what? Let me just switch over to another account for a minute. And I'm going to, yeah, I do have this account on here. Let me see. Okay, this is an account I've used a little bit more. This was for an award for Fact 2. We had people for the award recipients that we had for last year's Fact 2 award winners, we uploaded the information with their permission. We uploaded the resources, the letters, and the information they provided, and it generated an audio overview of their work. But let's say here, this was a kind of a fun one. This was based on Bastiat's petition for the candle makers, which is a satirical thing, and it generated this audio overview. So let's just play that for a second.
All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into a satirical economic argument from the 19th century.
Oh,
You might be thinking, like, what could be relevant about that today?
yeah.
But trust me, this one's a gem.
Okay.
We're looking at Bastiat's Candlestick Makers petition.
Okay.
It's this satirical open letter by French economist Frédéric Bastiat, written in 1845.
Right.
And it's basically about a group of candle makers who petition the government to block out the sun.
What?
Yeah, you heard that right, the sun.
Wow. That's pretty out there.
Right.
It sounds ridiculous,
Yeah.
but that's the power of satire, I guess.
Yeah,
Bastiat uses it to just brilliantly expose these flaws in protectionism,
right.
which is the idea of favoring domestic industries
Yeah.
by shielding them from foreign competition.
Okay, so picture this. You're a candle maker in 1845. France life is good.
Okay.
Business is booming. Everyone needs candles
Right.
until this new competitor shows up.
Uh-oh.
They're flooding the market with their product, driving prices down. And the worst part is they're giving it away for free.
Oh, my goodness. Who's this competitor?
This competitor, of course, is the sun.
Oh, okay, the sun.
Bastiat sets up this outrageous premise
Yeah.
to show how protectionist policies, while they might seem beneficial to certain industries, they actually harm the economy as a whole.
Yeah. I see.
So that's just a sample, but you notice the voices are pretty realistic. There's some interruptions going on. You can even hear a little bit of breathing. You have some filler words spaced throughout it just to make it sound very much like a real conversation. And it's generally pretty intuitive. And again, it takes a few minutes to generate, but once it's generated, you can then share it with others. And yeah, as Michelle noted, that was really realistic. And it sounds very much like a lot of podcasts out there. And I've seen a few videos that have been posted generated using Notebook LM because those two voices are the same in all of them. They didn't credit Notebook LM for creating them, but it was, clearly done that way. So it's kind of fun, and students appreciate it. They find it really useful. I hadn't thought about using it to evaluate rubrics. You could also do the same thing directly in Gemini, but again, or you could create a chatbot or gem to do it, but that's an interesting use. It's basically using the same Gemini features to do the analysis of the information and to do the query. So it's that's a good use that I hadn't considered. Okay, any other questions about Notebook LM? Play with it. It's a lot of fun. And a gem would be, a gem, and that's really easy to do. In fact, we'll be doing that this afternoon if you're interested. And if you can't be here, it'll be recorded. We'll walk through the steps of doing it, and we'll actually create some. That's, I think, an hour and 20-minute session just so that everyone can try to create something. Okay, so Notebook LM is a really powerful tool to have available both for us and for our students. And this is where I did put in the correct thing because I had read a post, I think it was a Reddit post, that cross notebook queries were available. And that was just something that was from a Google discussion. It's not there yet. But again, if you have a notebook on different topics and you want to see how they overlap or how they compare, you could just upload the notebooks or give links to the notebooks to Gemini and have it do some queries across them to see how the arguments are the same or the different in different collections of research. So you're not limited by the 50 or 300 of those. I believe only one person can create one. Actually, I'm not sure. Let me go back a bit.
I just went in and it looks like you can add an editor.
Okay, if you can add an editor, then yeah, you can have a team or a group of people work on editing it.
Guess what I'll be doing in the next few days.
Well, excellent. And let us know how it goes. That would be a good workshop, just talking about how a team can work with these tools. So yeah, I hadn't checked. You can certainly share the output, but I didn't realize you could also edit them, and that adds a lot more power. And the same could be true if you have groups of students working on a project. They can all contribute resources to it to generate that. Another feature we have is Lumi, and right now we have a somewhat weaker version of Lumi, but because we have an older version of Brightspace, it's no longer being developed. And that was true at the time when we adopted Brightspace in SUNY. They wanted to make sure they had a stable code base so that everything worked well, and it had a few more features than their new version. But Lumi is developing many more features for students in the current release of Brightspace. And once we upgrade to that, and I have no idea when SUNY will be doing that, we'll have more features. But for now, Lumi can be used by faculty to generate discussion prompts, assignments, question banks from content that appears in Brightspace. So you can basically go out and put some readings in there for students or some other materials and have Lumi look through it and generate some questions for you that you then can share with students. That could be for formative assessments, summative assessments. SUNY does require you, or does request that you notify students, though, when you're using any AI tool, including Lumi built in, to generate questions that they're working with. So it does a pretty decent job, as do pretty much most of the major AI platforms. You should always check the questions before assigning them, but it will generate a set of questions and you just check off which ones you want to use, or you can edit them and do whatever you want with them, or you can just keep trying again until you get a mix of questions that you find appropriate. And it's a nice way of getting a lot of practice questions for students. And again, we will have a new version of Brightspace at some point in the foreseeable future, at least. And the students will then have access to AI tools right within Brightspace. And here's a link to that recording if you want to see how Lumi works. And it's a nice little package. Now, ChatGPT 5.2 offers a number of features that we didn't have a year ago. Some of those, one of those, and this came with ChatGPT 5, was first the auto selection among models, and you could use that as your default, or you could specify your model. And that's going to be true with chatbots you create there as well. And in general, you have now these thinking models and you have the fast responses. So it's a trade-off. If you want a quick response, you get it really rapidly, but it's not going to be as much detailed. It's not going to process as much. If you want a more detailed response, you can choose the thinking models. They initially came out with an auto model selection and it was pretty horrible, but they improved that fairly rapidly, even late in the release of 5.0. The searches are much more efficient when you use the quick ones, but again, they're much more accurate and detailed if you use the thinking models. Another thing that's now available in ChatGPT 5.2 is AI agents. And the agent tools go beyond a chatbot. With a chatbot, you control what it does and people interact with it within the constraints that you set. With an AI agent, anyone can configure these to go out and do things on your behalf without your direct intervention. And we'll see an example of that well, here's an example. And this is one of the more scary things out there. This was created by David Wiley, who was one of the
Grammarly now uses AI to help you write, not just revise. Type a prompt and generate a persuasive, mistake-free draft.
And you see what happens here? This, by the way, is my, I'm not logged into my personal account, so I get all the ads. So in any case, this is one of the things that has a lot of people in higher ed really worried right now. This video was put together last summer after agent mode came out in ChatGPT. And let's just watch what it does. There is a prompt to use. Okay, so in 2.5 minutes, the AI agent went out and found what needed to be done, and let me get out of there, and completed the assignment. Someone in the University of California, yes, with the new model, it's even faster. Um, and in fact, we have a podcast coming out in early March. It was a group of people running some of the big online learning systems in California. Well, California, Duke, and I forgot where the other person was. Oh, and from Wiki, the basically the accreditation body for the West Coast. Now, I can't find the video for it, but shortly after this, someone else posted a video which did the same sort of thing, except from a faculty perspective, where a faculty member created an agent that, and by the way, that was a demo course, so he was able to comfortably put in his password and account because he set up his own LMS. But this works with Canvas and it works with pretty much all of the major learning management systems, including Brightspace. So a student could, if they're willing to give the agent their password and login, they'll have to assist it perhaps to authenticate, or they can authenticate first and then activate the agent. But the same thing was done with a faculty member, where the faculty member went out, checked to see what needed to be graded within the LMS, graded the students' work, posted comments, and posted grades in the grade book. in, again, just a minute or two. So it's an interesting situation. And right now, the Modern Language Association and several other large groups have called for cooperation between the learning management systems and the major AI platforms to try to find ways of blocking this capability. Because right now, there is no way of reliably blocking AI agents from completing any work in an online course, where basically in this case, the only thing he had to do other than supplying his password and account was respond to the question of whether they were willing to submit it on their behalf. So it's the thing that we should be aware of and at least somewhat concerned about, especially for fully online courses, fully asynchronous online classes. But it's also a really powerful tool, and AI agents can be used to do a lot of things for you. That basically they can have access to, if you grant them access to anything on your computer, they can go out and read and summarize your email. They could respond to some types of emails automatically if you ask them to. There's all sorts of things you can do. You can have them go out and search the web and find things and compile things for you. So the AI agents are pretty powerful tools that go quite a bit beyond just chatbots. And you can schedule those to take place at certain times. So, it's something we should be aware of and concerned about the potential for that, because it does make it much harder to rely on online assessments, although all that could be done anyway with AI tools, but it just takes the student aspect out of it entirely. So another thing is multimodal AI. We have now better and faster real-time interactions with artificial intelligence on laptops, smartphones, and tablets. You can use this with Gemini. You can use this with ChatGPT. If you have the phone version of it, you can interact with it by talking to these tools. And that's a really impressive feature. And you can also use the cameras on your smartphones to do this. So there's all sorts of videos posted online about this, or you could just try it yourself. Open up ChatGPT. If you have a paid account, well, even with a free account, open up ChatGPT, put it into multimodal mode, basically activate the camera and the voice and just talk to it. Use the camera to show it something and ask it to tell you what that is or tell you more about it. There's videos of people going out and aiming it at a part on a washing machine and asking how they could repair it and so forth. There's cases where people go out and aim the camera at an open refrigerator and ask what recipes they could make based on the ingredients that they see in the refrigerator and so on. So, the multimodal AI, where you can talk to it and use a camera and interact with it, is much more powerful than just a text-based version of this. Of course, along with that, we have the possibilities of deepfakes. And if you're in social media, a very large proportion of the videos that pops up and the reels that pop up and so forth, and the TikToks that pop up were created and submitted using AI agents or AI clones. One of the more interesting approaches is Pickle. And Pickle is a case where you can create your own, well, each of these allow you to create your own avatars. Pickle, HeyGen, and Synthesia. I forgot how it's pronounced. But basically, they'll create a synthetic avatar, which you can either use from a set that they've created, or you can basically upload a short video, some photos of yourself, or allow it to take a short video of you reading a script, and it will create an avatar of you. And Pickle is one of the cheaper ones. HeyGen and Synthesia are a little bit more expensive, although there are free versions if you just want to try them. But here's an example.
My work is easy because I use Fixer. Here's how I clear my inbox in minutes.
Again, I should have switched.
I start by checking how Fixer is.
We will skip this.
As you can see, I'm currently participating in a Zoom call. But what if I tell you that I'm actually not in front of the camera right now? And this is an AI-generated live stream that moves in sync with my voice. Pickle generates real-time video of talking you based on your audio inputs, which can be streamed directly to Zoom.
So there we go. That was the shortest one I found. There's some really interesting ones where there's videos of people driving a car while they appear to be sitting behind a desk wearing a nice outfit and so forth, very professional, while they're driving down the highway. There's other examples where people are sitting on the beach, lying back, getting a suntan, while they appear to be in a Zoom meeting, again, seated at a desk and so forth. And it opens up some interesting possibilities there. And now you can also create your own avatar, your own voice with these and many other programs, and have it generate a script for you and have it generate a video of you saying something. And those are kind of interesting. In an earlier workshop a year ago, I demonstrated some cases of that where it created a video of me. And then during a session, someone said, create an ad for SUNY Oswego. And it created an ad with my voice and my appearance on the screen, discussing AI, providing an AI provided script and recording of me creating an ad selling SUNY Oswego. Some of the voice synthesis isn't great, but again, with Pickle, it's using your own voice, so it's taking your audio and creating it. But if you want to use a synthesized version of your voice, or use your own, or pick a voice from their pre-selected ones, 11 Labs is probably the best quality voice synthesis. The voices created by this are practically indistinguishable from your own voice. And if you combine that with some of the avatar creations, you can generate some really realistic videos, and they're all over the internet right now. Oops. Well, I didn't mean to go there, but you can play with it. Well, for example, here we go.
I think this is a really nice way to just talk naturally together, talk plain.
And it gives you some examples. If you browse through the website, there's some examples of the original person speaking, we recorded, and then a synthesized version of the voice saying the same things or very similar things. And it's remarkably good. Now, another troubling thing from the perspective of teaching and assessing learning in higher ed is that there are a lot of Chrome plugins. For a while, Chrome had one, or Google created their own, but they walked it back in a couple of weeks because they got a lot of flack from educators. But basically, these plugins will search your screen, see if there's any questions, multiple choice, short response or essay questions on the screen, and just offer to provide an answer to you that it will then paste right into your screen. So there's a lot of these, and these are things that show up in students' ads all the time. So students are getting a lot of ads, basically encouraging them to use these tools so that they don't have to actually answer online questions themselves or things that they can see on their computer. Now, those could be used in some positive ways, but I suspect that that's not the most common use. Another thing which hasn't really been seen that much in the wild yet, but is conceptually there, is the ability of AI glasses, of which we're seeing them in malls now and so forth, as well as online purchases, and they're not terribly expensive, that in general can serve as a similar sort of interface. It could very easily take a recording of questions that are on paper in front of you, because we could always avoid the effect of the Chrome plugins by giving exams in person on paper. But if students start wearing AI glasses that basically just scan for questions and give them the answers on the screen, right in front of their eyes, that's going to be a lot harder to detect because these glasses don't look as much like the old Google goggles that came out, which were pretty clearly, AI glasses. The new ones are much less likely to be detected, and that's going to become increasingly true as we move forward. So, if students are wearing, there's also someone trying to develop contact lenses with similar capabilities. It's a startup. I don't know if they'll be successful, but it's an interesting situation. It's incredibly difficult to detect AI with various AI detectors out there. And one of the most popular GPTs in ChatGPT is a humanizer GPT, which will take things that were created by AI and convert them into something that sounds more human, and it makes it less detectable. Although some of them, well, one of the major AI detectors now have a humanizer detection service available in beta, at least, that can sometimes detect that, but it's an escalating battle and we're not winning that. If you do, well, if you click on this link, it will show you some of the YouTube videos that students have on defeating AI detection. One other thing I just threw in is that now accreditors are starting to require accrediting agencies or starting to require that institutions have some way of addressing this. And middle states are among those that have started doing this. The most common thing right now is having institutions document how they're addressing AI, and monitoring the bias in AI algorithms, and also ensuring that a human is in the loop for high stakes decisions like admitting students and grading students' work. Because again, a lot of these things can be automated, and there are some programs out there that automate even grading handwritten work. Gradescope is the most common one, and I know Binghamton and a few, and SUNY and Stony Brook, both Binghamton and I believe Stony Brook have access to Gradescope, which will again grade student handwritten work, mostly in sciences, because it will convert mathematical notation into a digital format and so on, and at least provide grade recommendations. And this is what I mentioned about environmental things. And, if you want to find out more about it, this tells you what a typical query does, but it does not tell you how much energy is used for video or audio generation. And that's a really good question. And in general, though, right now, as of actually last summer, a median query in Gemini used, about 0.25 to 5 milliliters of water, which is 1/33 of the amount required a year earlier. And it basically uses as much energy as 8 to 10 seconds of streaming Netflix or a 2008 Gemini search, Google search. And they're getting better. But again, AI systems are being used much more heavily. And these are just some things we should think about as and we've talked about these in some other workshops, but these are just things to think about in response to this. How are we still going to have assessment integrity? And we'll stop here. I'm afraid we're kind of out of time, but if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to stop the share and end this session so we can get the next one started. Thanks for being here, and the next session will start in just a minute or so. Thanks. I'll be right back. I'm sorry, I have to exit in order to get the video rendered, but if you just click on the link, you'll be